Welcome. Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Dan.
I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. All right, we're on episode 3, and we are reading from the Silmarillion, and we're at the Valaquenta. Valaquenta. Account of the Valar and Maiar according to the law of Eldar. In the beginning, Eru, the One, who in the Elvish tongue is named Ilúvatar, made the Einar of his thought, and they made a great music before him. In this music the world was begun, for Ilúvatar made visible the song of Einar, and they beheld it as a light in the darkness. And many among them became enamored of its beauty, and of its history, which they saw beginning and unfolding as in a vision. Therefore Ilúvatar gave to their vision being, and set it amid the void, and the secret fire was sent to burn at the heart of the world. It was called Ea. Then those of the Einar who desired it arose and entered into the world at the beginning of time, and it was their task to achieve it, and by their labors to fulfill the vision which they had seen. Long they labored in the regions of Ea, which are vast beyond the thoughts of elves and men, until the time appointed was made Arda, the kingdom of earth. And they put on the raiment of earth, and descended into it, and dwelt therein. Of the Valar. The great among these spirits the elves named the Valar, the powers of Arda, and men have often called them gods. The lords of the Valar are 7, and the Valier, the queens of the Valar, are 7 also. These were their names in the Elvish tongue, as it was spoken in Valinor, though they have other names in the speech of the elves in Middle-earth, and their names among men are manifold. The names of the lords in due order are Manwë, Ulmo, Aulë, Orome, Mandos, Lorien, and Tolkas. And the names of the queens are Vada, Yavanna, Nienna, Este, Vaere, Vanna, and Nessa. Melkor is counted no longer among the Valar, and his name is not spoken upon earth. Manwë and Melkor were brethren in the thought of Ilúvatar. The mightiest of those, Einar, who came into the world, was in his beginning Melkor, but Manwë is dearest to Ilúvatar, and understands most clearly his purposes. He was appointed to be, in the fullness of time, the first of all kings, lord of the realm of Arda, and ruler over all that dwell therein. In Arda his delight is in the winds and the clouds, and in all the regions of the air, from the heights to the depths, from the utmost borders of the vale of Arda to the breezes that blow in the grass. Sulimo is he surnamed, lord of the breath of Arda. All swift birds, strong of wing, he loves, and they come and go at his bidding. With Manwë dwells Vada, Lady of the Stars, who knows all the regions of Ea. Too great is her beauty to be declared in the words of men or elves, for the light of Ilúvatar lives still in her face. In light is her power and her joy. Out of the deeps of Ea she came to the aid of Manwë. For Melkor she knew from before the making of the music, and rejected him, and he hated her, and feared her more than all others who Eru made. Manwë and Vada are seldom parted, and they remain in Valinor. Their halls are above the everlasting snow upon Olilose, the utmost tower of Taniquetil, tallest of all the mountains upon earth. When Manwë there ascends his throne and looks forth, if Varda is beside him, he sees further than all other eyes, through mist and through darkness and over the leagues of the sea. And if Manwë is with her, Varda hears more clearly than all the other ears the sound of the voices that cry from east to west, from the hills and the valleys, and from the dark places that Melkor has made upon earth. Of all the great ones who dwell in this world, the elves hold Varda the most in reverence and love. Elbereth they name her, and they call upon her name out of the shadows of Middle-earth, and uplift it in song at the rising of the stars. Ulmo is the Lord of Waters. He is alone. He dwells nowhere long, but moves as he will in the deep waters about the earth or under the earth. He is next in might to Manwë, and before Valinor was made, he was closest to him in friendship. But thereafter he went seldom to the councils of Valar, unless great matters were in debate. For he kept all Arda in thought, and he has no need for any resting place. Moreover, he does not walk upon land, and will seldom clothe himself in a body after the manner of his peers. If the children of Eru beheld him, they were filled with great dread, for the arising of the king of the sea was terrible, as a mounting wave that strides to the land, with dark helm foam-crested, and raiment of mail shimmering from silver down into shadows of green. The trumpets of Manwë are loud, but Ulmo's voice is deep as the deeps of the ocean, which he only has seen. None the less, Ulmo loves both elves and men, and never abandoned them, not even when they lay under the wrath of the Valar. At times, he would come unseen to the shores of Middle-earth, or pass far into up firths of the sea, and there make music upon his great horns, the Ulumuri, that are wrought of white shell, and those to whom the music comes hear it ever after in their hearts, and longing for the sea never leaves them again. But mostly Ulmo speaks to those who dwell in Middle-earth with voices that are heard only as the music of water. For all seas, lakes, rivers, fountains, and springs are in his government, so that the elves say that the spirit of Ulmo runs in the veins of the world. Thus, news comes to Ulmo, even in the deeps, of all the needs and griefs of Arda, which otherwise would be hidden from Manwë. Aulë has might little less than Ulmo, his lordship over all the substances of which Arda is made. In the beginning, he wrought much in fellowship with Manwë and Ulmo, and the fashioning of all lands was his labor. He is a smith and a master of all crafts, and he delights in works of skill, however small, as much as in the mighty building of old. His are the gems that lie deep in the earth, and the gold that is fair in the hand, no less than the walls of the mountains and the basins of the sea. The Noldor learned most of him, and he was ever their friend. Melkor was jealous of him, for Aulë, I can't even say this, Aulë was most like himself in thought and in powers. And there was long strife between them, in which Melkor ever marred and undid the works of Aulë. And Aulë grew weary in repairing the tumults and disorders of Melkor. Both also desired to make things of their own, that should be new and unthought of by others, and delighted in the praise of their skill. But Aulë remained faithful to Eru, and submitted all that he did to his will. And he did not envy the work of others, but sought and gave counsel. whereas Melkor spent his spirit in envy and hate, until at last he could make nothing save in mockery of the thought of others, and all their works he destroyed if he could. What a bastard. Man, Melkor.
Now we have to put an explicit tag on this podcast.
Yeah, we should probably. Well, I mean, he, in a way, has chosen himself to be fatherless. So
that's a good point. Yeah,
truest sense of the word. But
yeah.
I don't know. Like, yeah, it's interesting because we're not seeing as much there's tension being put into the story in a more less what's the word, resolved way. Like before, we had this poetry, it's beautiful, and like Melkor comes in, tries to mess things up, and ha ha ha, look, it's actually like snow and nice, and everything's more beautiful than it was before because of your evil. But now that's not being resolved. It's just more, it's getting more complicated. Creation is unfolding. There's living beings, and Melkor is just trying his hardest to mess it up.
One thought I had, I'm curious what you guys have to say about this too. You know, just as I had said before, you can kind of take that theme of the music and just keep carrying it throughout this narrative. And something I find really interesting is how each of the Valar are associated with certain elements or spheres in the world, and
right.
I think that's important, especially as we talk more about like the Maiar and others who are kind of like the lieutenants of the Valar, how they wield these certain powers, or they have dominion over certain areas. But the root of that, I think, is that they have unique access to that part of the mind of Ilúvatar. And I love how it talks about that. I like this line particularly when talking about Ulmo, and he kind of reigns over water, right, in the world, and there's parts of the ocean that only he knows, depths of the ocean that only he knows. And
there's griefs and strife in Arda that only he knows.
Yes.
And maybe Varda would know it as well, because she can hear everything, or most everything.
Yeah. And with Ulmo in particular, one little line that struck me, having grown up in Southern California, and now living in Minnesota, it says, "Those to whom his music comes hear it ever after in their hearts, and longing for the sea never leaves them again." And not even like literal music, but I mean, maybe like My Heart Will Go On. You hear that once and you just long for the sea for the rest of your life. But
or not.
You will never let go after you
that's
you
the
hear
one.
that song.
Okay.
But really, like it's not even literal music. It's just there's something in our normal human experience in this world where just the vastness of the ocean, how immense it really is. It's like no wonder people's worshipped like the water and stuff, because it's just this powerful thing, and just getting a glimpse of it just on the shoreline. I don't know. There's something in us drawn to that kind of thing. And it's interesting that I love this, how poetic it is, that it's the music of Ulmo that really captures the hearts of people. And there are particular peoples who love the ocean or love being near the water. And that's true
that
of
would
all
be the
these other-
Numenorians, right? Who we will come to meet, who live on an island, and then they're like mariners, so they'll sail around and explore the ocean. That's another interesting. There's so many interesting stories within the Silmarillion, and one of them is like this island of Numenor, and then these mariners who do have this song, Ulmo's song in their hearts, and they always want to be out on the water and exploring. But the Valar, what I love about them is how completely unique each of them are, and how Tolkien will build up the tension or the meanings of things or the importance of things based on how these Valar interact with each other. Like, we're going to meet some Valar next time that are very different than the ones we met, and they're all going to interact based on what's going to happen in the narrative. They're going to like take counsel together. And like we heard from Ulmo, he's not usually at the councils. He's in the deep waters, and you know, he's in. What's so cool about Ulmo too is he's involved with Arda probably more than any of the other Valar. He cares about what's going on. Not that the others don't care. Like, certainly Varda, she hears the cries of the poor, so to speak. But Ulmo is like close to everyone because he, as the Lord of the Deep Waters, and because every tributary is a part of his dominion, he's like connected to everyone in Arda.
In a way, he's what Melkor could have been. You know, Melkor went off on his own and created by himself, or attempted creation by himself, and tried to muscle his way into creation. And yet Manwë is still in harmony with everyone and really close in creation, and yet at the same time it's kind of given him reign to just kind of go off and sort of do his own thing. And
you mean Ulmo is given reign? And
did I say Manwë? Sorry,
Yeah.
I meant Ulmo. Thank you. Yeah, Ulmo is given his own kind of reign in a way, and Melkor has missed out on that dignity and freedom that Ilúvatar wishes to give his creation, including the Ainur and the Valar.
One thing I love that you kind of touched on a little bit, I think, was just how, you know, with how unique they each are and how they relate to one another, that's manifested in the world kind of based on their lordship, right? And I think in the previous reading that we did last time, it talked about how Manwë being Lord of the Skies and Ulmo Lord of the Waters, clouds and mist and rain are kind of like their meeting place, you know? And so all these things, all these good things.
That's where they're creating together, right? Is that what you're talking about? Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, and each of them have these kinds of relationships where whatever it is that they specialize in or that they have dominion over, as they relate and work together and cooperate, these kind of new versions of these things, or these they build upon each other, and these new things are born of that, which is very interesting. And I Dan, to your point too, that I love. There's a big comparison here, I think, between Aulë and Melkor, because they both kind of have this desire to create, and I think that's some of what you were talking about too. Like, Melkor just contrasts each of the Valar in some way, because he was one in a sense, although he's not. It says he's not counted among them anymore. But he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be like them, and he chose not to be.
There's an interesting tidbit is Aulë, or Alulele, as some people say, or was it Lalulele? I forget. Aulë has a connection, that same kind of connection, with someone we'll meet soon named Fëanor as well. This kind of burning desire to create and craft. And a connection with Saruman from the Lord of the Rings, who has the same desire to build and to craft, because in Orthanc, Saruman is crafting, eventually he's crafting the Uruk-hai and crafting this great like battle location in his domain. So even in the very beginning of the mythology, you have this type of Valar that then it's going to have a narrative connection with a very important figure we'll meet named Fëanor, and then even Saruman from the Lord of the Rings. And he has an affinity for both Fëanor and Saruman. Aulë does. It's interesting.
What you were saying earlier about how the Valar like connect and how they relate, I think it's really cool the way that like there's a sort of masculine and a feminine kind of quality to these beings that's expressed in the Valar and the what are the ladies called?
Valier or something like that.
Yeah, whatever they're called. But the way the interaction of Manwë and Vada, like how they complement each other, like together, when they're together, they can, respectively, see further and hear further, but only when they're together, right? It's a beautiful thing. It made me think of, actually, my mind went to Dungeons and Dragons, because growing up, like Dungeons and Dragons, I didn't play it, but I'd go to like miniature shops or whatever and see these great posters, and you end up having these war hero like swords and armor men and elves and wizards. But then you'd have like the female versions, which were always like invariably kind of sexualized a little bit, right, in these stores, which missed the point, because I mean Dungeons and Dragons was born out of the Lord of the Rings, right? But what Lord of the Rings did was, in a time that people would accuse of being like, well, that was the epitome of the patriarchy, and like this is where society's gone to today, like, and this is why women are like not treated the same as men. Well, Tolkien here is kind of putting women and men in spiritual senses, masculine and feminine, as like equals and co-partners in a work. And not only that, they're not competing, they're complementing.
Yeah, right.
They're able to like make each other better. And in literature, I think that it's just an important point that like at the time that he wrote this, which was around World War I and World War II, like this is like his thought in it, and this is probably what he thought of the world, was like there's this great complementarity of the sexes, as we would say, and like working together, and like that's the origins of why, like in Dungeons and Dragons and these games, like you have these great feminine warrior figures. It came from him.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. I like how Greg, you just highlighted it, or Greg K. Shout out to Guy K.
Guy K,
our biggest fan. You just highlighted how Melkor hates her and fears her the most, because it says a little earlier, the light of Iluvatar still lives in her face. So like the power of a woman whose beauty can like shape civilizations, and also the gift that women have to have compassion, to understand the suffering of others. That's a gift that Varda has, is in her excellent hearing. She can, she hears all the, woes of Arda. That's a very beautiful image of a woman. And obviously we would be remiss not to mention Lady of the Stars, which makes you think of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Yeah. There's a lot of connections with, I mean, even just the fact that Melkor hates her the most and fears her the most of all things. It's a
Catholic idea, right?
Yeah.
That a woman would be the most hated because she's the most to be feared, because a woman can bring forth something that a man can't.
Mm-hmm.
Probably going to get censored for that on YouTube, though.
Something that is a fascinating. I want to continue this. We could talk about this stuff for hours. So I know we have time limits and stuff, but one thing I really wanted to point out, just to connect this to Lord of the Rings. I remember I had read Lord of the Rings for the first time several years ago, and part of what's confusing about that is there are all these names, but one name that comes up pretty regularly throughout is Elbereth, which is Varda's name.
Of Elbereth.
Yeah, and Elbereth is, I guess, the Elvish name of her or something like that. But something that happens frequently in Lord of the Rings is Frodo will invoke her name, but he doesn't really even know what he's saying, in a sense. Like he doesn't fully understand who she is, but there's something like almost intuitive within him to just like cry out to her when he's in dark moments. And it's, in a sense, you can read it in this way. It's because that's who she is. She's someone who listens to these cries of people. She hears when people are in anguish, when people are suffering, she hears that. And it's like a natural thing for him to call out to her in times of distress. I mean, when I read this stuff, it just like, even though it had been a while since I'd read The Lord of the Rings, I remembered that, and it just expanded my experience of Lord of the Rings even more.
Yeah. Well, in light is her power and her joy. What is the gift that Galadriel gives to Frodo, right?
Right.
Yep.
And it's like, it's this light that shines in dark places. And in a way, there's a sacramental dimension to that light making present Elbereth in those moments. It's awesome. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Which is so cool when you realize that the showdown with Shelob, who creates darkness, like Shelob consumes, and Shelob's mother, who we'll meet, like they create webs of darkness. And so light, which is the light of Iluvatar, is a thing that would terrify Shelob. Just that little vial of light. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Gregolis, you were going to say something.
I lost it. But just, those connections, they come throughout, and hopefully we won't miss too many of them. We can bring them up. But for anyone listening too, if you recognize some of these things, definitely reach out to us and bring them up too.
You know how Manwë can see farther than anyone, and Varda can hear farther than anyone?
Women are better listeners, that's why.
That's true. And my wife, when she's pregnant, can like smell farther than anyone. Like someone's stinky in the house. And then
is that why you have to sleep in the living room when she's pregnant?
You married a man, married a grown man. She's probably listening to this, so I'm just pointing it to her.
I love it.
Dan, do you want to close this out?
Oh, is it me? I forgot I was leading this. I honestly was expecting Greg to do this. Okay, yes. I will close this out now. This was great. Thanks for joining us today on this episode. And if you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarillions out of 3, or 5 stars, or whatever maximal rating you can give us helps the algorithm.
10,000 mathoms.
10,000 mathoms. As you can find in my mother's house in Berkshire in England. Follow us everywhere Before the Fellowship, and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.